Today's essential question, which is number 3 out of 4 total, how can the changes in allele frequency within a population be measured? And how does speciation occur? So there are two parts to today's essential question. How can the changes in allele frequency within a population be measured? And how does speciation occur? Our first left-hand column for today, Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. Evolution is the change in a population's gene pool over time. Therefore, the population is considered the unit of evolution. The Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium is a principle that can be used as a baseline against which changes in allele frequency among a population can be measured. The principle states that in the absence of disturbing factors, different genotype frequencies in a population will reach an equilibrium and will remain stable over several generations. However, the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium also states that evolution should be expected in all populations virtually all of the time. This is possible because populations in nature always experience disturbing factors such as mutations, selection, migrations, genetic drift, and changes to their environment.
Population is the basic unit of evolution.
When evolutionary biologists think about populations, they think about how frequencies of genes change through time. And back around the early 1900s, two different geneticists, Hardy and Weinberg, came together and did a little bit of math that showed that without any of the evolutionary forces like selection and drift and migration, gene frequencies could not change. This is what we call equilibrium.
Now, for the Hardy-Weinberg principle to be applied, there must be 5 conditions present. And so these are the conditions of the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. If the allele frequencies change, then the population is not in equilibrium. This is true of every population in nature. Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium is possible only for an idealized population that satisfies the following set of assumptions. Please take these down. There is no mutation. There's no mutations of alleles or genes in the gene pool of the population. There's no migration into or out of the population. This is also known as isolation, meaning populations must be isolated from each other so that there is no exchange of genetic material between them. There must be an infinitely large population size, meaning numbers of organisms in the population must be very large. And there is no natural selection, meaning there can be no advantage of one genotype over another due to the process of natural selection. And there must be no sexual selection, which means that mating must be totally random. In other words, females cannot select male mates with a particular genotype. Now, natural populations cannot meet all of the conditions just listed. Therefore, Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium can only be met in an artificial environment such as the laboratory. Here, let's learn how to use the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. The Hardy-Weinberg equation, which is on the screen here, which you'll need to take down, can be used to make predictions about a population. The Hardy-Weinberg equation for a population which is in equilibrium, which again doesn't happen in nature, but if it were to be in equilibrium, the equation would be p squared plus 2pq plus q squared is all equal to 1. And in this equation, p is the frequency of the dominant allele, and q is the frequency of the recessive allele. So, for a gene with alleles capital B and lowercase b, the equation representing possible genotypes in genetic equilibrium is whatever the frequency of B is, capital B squared, plus 2 times the frequency of big B times the frequency of little b, plus whatever the frequency of Q is squared. We can also say that the frequency of B squared plus big B little b times 2 plus the frequency of little b squared is equal to 1. The Hardy-Weinberg equation can be used to make predictions about future generations' genotypes. And on the next screen, let's show you how we use it. So you'll want to take this sample problem down in your notes. So for example, the allele frequencies in one generation of a particular population are big R is equal to 65%, and little r is equal to 35%. Predict the probability of the possible genotypes in the next generation. Now, we haven't gone over genotypes in any sort of detail, but for the purposes of this sample, we can assume that the different genotypes are big R, big R, big R, or little r, little r. So we will apply the Hardy-Weinberg equation here. We see it again for the solution. All of these things added together must be equal to 1. So we'll simply plug in the allele frequencies into the equation. And so if we want to solve for big R, we simply use P squared. And so we take the frequency of big R and multiply it again by the frequency of big R. Now you'll notice that the percentage form of the frequency is 65%. However, when we plug that into the equation, it needs to be in the form of a decimal. So 65% becomes 0.65. Now when we square 0.65, we get 0.42, which in percentage form is 42%, meaning that there's a 42% chance that based on these frequencies, the next generation will show big R genotypes. Now for the big R, little r, we'll use 2 times P times Q. So we'll take 2 and we'll multiply that by the frequency of the big R times the frequency of the little r, which looks like 2 multiplied by 0.65 multiplied by 0.35, which is 0.46. Again, in percentage form, that's 46%. And lastly, let's take the Q and square it. This is going to be the frequency of the little r. Now, the frequency for the little r is 35%, like we've already seen. So we'll change that into a decimal form, or 0.35, and then square it. And so that will be 12%. Now, what we'll notice is that when we actually use the Hardy-Weinberg equation, we add all those decimals up, and they equal 1. If you wanted to add them all up in percentage form, they would add up to equal 100%. Our next left-hand column for today, speciation. Speciation.
Words read, what do you get if you cross a mouse with a mango? A fence separates a group of mice from a group of mangoes.
What do you get if you cross a mouse with a mango? Don't be ridiculous. You can't cross a mouse with a mango because they are reproductively isolated. The two species have completely separate gene pools that cannot be combined. In biology, a species is a group of individuals that can interbreed. A gene pool for a species is the set of genes in the population at any given time. Evolution is a change in the gene pool of a population over time. So when two groups are reproductively isolated, like the mouse and the mango, they have separate gene pools and are therefore considered two different species. Speciation is the process by which new species are created. There are several ways this can happen. Imagine, for example, a population of mice that can interbreed because they are all of the same species. A flood comes along, causing the landscape to change, and isolates one group of mice from the other. The two groups can no longer breed due to physical separation. Now imagine a few thousand years pass and suddenly an earthquake occurs, reuniting the two populations.
One population of mice is white, and the other has pink and green spots.
Thanks to several millennia of separation, the mice may look different or behave differently, or have other genetic changes that make interbreeding impossible. Even though they are no longer physically separated, something keeps them apart. Because the two groups are now reproductively isolated, they are considered different species.
Speciation by geographic separation is called allopatric speciation, while speciation that occurs without physical barriers is called sympatric speciation.
Different species can look quite similar. For example, South American jaguars and African leopards are both large spotted cats, but different species. Species that are physically separated for a very long time may undergo parallel evolution, which is they might evolve in very similar ways after splitting off from a common ancestor. In cases of convergent evolution, unrelated species evolve in similar ways. For example, birds, insects, and bats all fly and have wings, but they evolved from different ancestors.
Divergent evolution is what happens when a population splits off and becomes a new species. The two species, though closely related, develop new traits to better help them fit into their environments.
All of these examples are based on species that reproduce sexually. That is, two parents each contribute to the genetic makeup of the offspring. In species that reproduce asexually or without sex, including many one-celled organisms, insects, and plants, each offspring is genetically identical to its single parent. In other words, each offspring is a clone.
A bacterium replicates.
Occasional mutations can still occur when a DNA strand is damaged by a chemical reaction or even a cosmic ray. Every so often, a mutation will actually survive and the cell will reproduce, resulting in a new strain of bacteria for
Different dog breeds branch out from the words Canis familiaris.
the species is the most important way we have of grouping organisms. Below the species level are different varieties or subspecies. These different varieties all belong to the same species because they can interbreed, but have some distinguishing feature. Take poodles and German shepherds, for instance.
You could breed them together, but would you really want to?
The process of evolution can be summarized in 7 words. Genes mutate. Individuals are selected. Populations evolve.
And you'll probably never be able to cross a mouse with a mango.
So let's keep working on how does speciation occur. Now, for those of you taking notes, this image will stay on the screen for a couple of minutes, so please add it to your notes. The formation of a new species, like we just mentioned, is called speciation. Members of the same species that reproduce sexually must be able to mate and produce fertile offspring. Mating and thus gene flow might stop between two parts of a population if splitting of the population occurs. Once populations can no longer reproduce with each other, speciation can occur. Speciation may occur for various reasons. A divergence based on behavior, ecological, or genetic reasons is called sympatric speciation. This happens when two or more descendants arise from a single ancestral species, and all of them are located in the same geographical region. For example, part of a population may seek out a new food source or develop a different type of mating ritual, and over time, changes due to the different behaviors of the group can lead to speciation. In parapatric speciation, a new species evolves due to changes in local habitats that cause non-random mating. Those individuals occupying and adapting to one habitat, although physically close to individuals in another habitat, are more likely to mate with one another. Over time, the genomes of the two groups diverge, and sometimes gene flow is restricted because of the changes in mating habits of the population. Speciation may, therefore, occur because a reduced gene flow between the sections of population. Parapatric speciation is another example of how natural selection increases diversity. Now, the most common reason for speciation is the separation of a population. Separation is most often due to geographic features such as mountains or water. This type of speciation is termed allopatric speciation. Natural selection is the driving constant for most of the speciation that we see. However, sexual selection may also play a part. Some inherited traits increase an individual's chance of attracting a mate. These traits will tend to be passed on as the attractive individual reproduces more frequently. This type of selection is called sexual selection. Sexual selection often results in sexual dimorphism, or phenotypic differences between the sexes of a species. Many animals exhibit sexual dimorphism through either structural or behavioral differences. This is evident in the differences between a male peacock and a female peahen. The male has a colorful plumage that, coupled with a display, is intended to encourage the female to mate. Strangely, sexual selection may result in phenotypes that are harmful to the individual's survival. For example, long, decorative tail feathers possessed by birds may attract predators and make escape flight more difficult. In such cases, the benefits of obtaining mates and breeding outweigh those additional risks of death from predation. Many scientists think that sexual selection often occurs in conjunction with natural selection, and some consider it a specific form of sympatric selection.
The question of why male peacocks have such elaborate tails plagued evolutionary biologists. What possible purpose could such ornamentation serve? How could natural selection favor a trait that might not only attract predators, but make it difficult to run away from them?
Yikes!
Would wearing a long gown and heels help you win a marathon?
Ouch!
Not likely. Charles Darwin argued that pretty tails help peacocks attract mates.
Look at me!
Isn't he cute? Hubba hubba.
So what am I, chopped liver? And that peahens prefer males with big, bright tails.
Oh my!
A peacock with a small drab tail might live longer, but he probably wouldn't be popular with the ladies.
What's wrong with me?
With no offspring to carry on the drab tail line, the genes for these traits would soon die out. But why do peahens prefer males with big, bright tails?
That's pretty desirable.
The answer? Only healthy, well-fed birds can grow big tails.
No, my tail is killing me.
So peahens bypass scrawny-tailed males and choose the flashy ones
Look at me!
based on the strength of their reproductive potential.
Nice.
In fact, when shown males with artificial tails bigger than the bird's natural ones,
Look at my tail.
peahens will choose the artificially enhanced males.
Check it out. Dreamy. I pick him. He's super. Hubba hubba. He's my choice.
If an organism lives to be 1,000 years old but has no offspring, it might as well not have lived at all as far as its genes are concerned. So natural selection is not just about survival, it's also about successful reproduction. Natural selection for courtship purposes is called sexual selection, and it can help attract mates and drive off rivals.
King of the jungle.
The gaudy looks and macho behavior are usually, but not always, displayed by males.
I can bench more than you.
Yeah, so what?
In species where females do the choosing, they don't need the costly adornments and weapons, saving their energy instead for bearing and raising offspring. There are many species, however,
Here I am, honey.
where the male expends as much energy or more in raising the offspring as the female does.
Off I go. Bye, honey. Not too much TV.
But in a process called runaway selection, things can get a bit bizarre. Take the example of the now extinct Irish elk. One theory was that under constant sexual selection, the elk's antlers increased in size because males were using them to attract mates and drive off the competition. The antlers eventually became so huge
Blimey, I'm stuck. Nice antlers.
that some evolutionary biologists wonder whether the Irish elk could have lasted much longer. That is, if climate change hadn't gotten to them first.
A little help here.
In the rich variety of human culture, courtship is a far more complex affair.
Wow.
But evolutionary psychologist Jeffrey Miller had an interesting theory.
The human capacity to create and appreciate art, music, and poetry did not evolve because it provided any survival benefit, but rather because it helped our ancestors seduce their potential mates.
This idea that our artistry functions as a sexual display is controversial and awaits rigorous testing. However, it is undeniable that the capacity for culture is much more highly developed in humans than in any other species. And that's pretty desirable.
At this point, you should be able to generate an answer to today's essential question, which again has two parts. How can the changes in allele frequency within a population be measured? And how does speciation occur? Please press pause on the video and write your answer to today's essential question in the summary box at the bottom of your notes now.